Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Got Freedom podcast. I am your host, Jacqueline Timmer. We have a special guest with us today, Robbie Starbuck. Robbie is a Cuban-American director, Hollywood director, who's worked with Natalie Portman, Snoop Dogg, Jamie Foxx, and others. In 2015, he and his wife came out as Republican spokespersons. They have recently relocated from LA to Tennessee with their 3 children. Robbie, it's great to have you on today. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Jacqueline. I appreciate it. Always happy to come on and help spread our message.
Amazing. So I watched your documentary with my husband last night. Absolutely phenomenal. But I'd like to hear a little bit about your journey. I saw that you're a Cuban-American Hollywood producer, and that your grandfather, is it your grandfather that immigrated and still returns over to Cuba?
My whole family, essentially. My grandpa's the only one that goes back still. Even in his old age, he's the one who makes the trips. I think in a lot of Cuban families, we have like a designated family member who will go back and bring essentials, things that they just don't have in Cuba. Despite what people like documentary maker Michael Moore tell people, in Cuba, they lack the essentials, things like as simple as Advil, or women's health products. They don't have those things. So, he's made that trip to go back. Like a lot of Cuban families, they have that one person that does, but everybody else refuses to until Cuba's free.
Robbie recently did a documentary called I Am Republican. Let's take a look at that for a moment.
So I reached out to people and I said, please send me videos. Why are you a Republican? I want to be able to share with people a real representation of who we are. So what you're about to see is a true representation of the Republican Party.
I am a free spirit and a free thinker, and I am also a Republican.
The media tells everyone that Republicans are old white men, and they're not. Republicans are everybody. My name is Sarah, and I'm a Republican.
I'm a Republican.
I am a Republican.
I am Republican.
I'm a Republican.
I'm a Republican.
I am a Republican.
I am a Republican.
I'm a Republican.
I'm a Republican.
I am a Republican, and I love America.
I am a Republican.
We don't act alike. We all have our own ideas about life.
We are Black.
We're white. We're Latinos.
We're Asian.
We're Middle Eastern.
We're brothers.
We're sisters.
We are legal immigrants.
We're veterans.
We're in every industry.
We're everywhere.
We're mothers.
Dads.
We're daughters.
We're grandfathers.
I am a girlfriend.
We speak English and a million other languages.
We're Jewish.
We're storytellers.
Military, blue collar, white collar.
We're truckers. We're grocery store workers.
We are creatives.
We are doctors and lawyers and actors and teachers.
We're artists.
I'm a former Green Beret, combat veteran of Iraq, Afghanistan, and North Africa.
I'm a gay, Latina, legal immigrant woman. I'm an American. I'm a Republican.
We are exactly what makes America so great.
We come from every walk of life.
We don't act one way.
We don't look one way.
We don't think one way.
We have good reasons for our convictions.
We are American.
And we are Republicans.
So Robbie, with your mom coming from Cuba and growing up here, in the documentary you say you were not always a Republican. What did that journey look like, and what does conservatism mean to you?
That's a great question. So I'll start with, where I was before I came out as Republican. And I was essentially conservative, but didn't know it. It was one of those things I think a lot of young people are guilty of. When I was young, I didn't really examine what each party truly stood for. And I think beyond that, there were really terrible leaders in the Republican Party. I wasn't a fan of Mitt Romney or John McCain. I did end up voting for Romney. That was my first Republican presidential vote. But previous to that, I think I was turned off by some of the leadership because it didn't seem like all the values were always in line with each other. Like, take, for instance, some of the changes that have happened under Trump's leadership is that we've started to live our values in terms of what we believe. So you take an issue like, let's say, gay marriage. We stand for religious freedom as conservatives. That means that I believe every religious group has the right to not do something that violates their faith. On the other hand, we also believe that the government doesn't have the right to infringe on people's rights. So we've essentially left that issue alone in terms of the government and said, everybody sort of has equal opportunity under the law. when it comes to government. But on the religious side, religion should always be protected with their ability to not do anything that violates their faith. These sort of things were not always consistent before Trump came around. And that's sort of the most, I'd say, somewhat liberal idea I could talk about, us staying consistent with our conservative values, which was not the case previously. So, issues like that, I just hadn't looked into really deeply. And I would say that around the second term of Obama, before that, I started to look really deeply as we had our first child at what he had done. And what he had done didn't jive with what he had campaigned on. He wasn't doing what he campaigned on. He didn't keep any of his promises. And so I started to look elsewhere, and I realized that, number one, I was pro-life, and that wasn't consistent with the Democratic Party. I really stood behind the idea that there was fetal pain science, and I still stand by that today, that is the reason I'm pro-life. It's not just a morality issue, it's a science issue. And I would say I started to realize that our public school system was not doing a service to students. It was, it had taught me that a fetus was essentially just a clump of cells. That's what I learned in public school. And that leans you into the territory of being a Democrat. But once you actually look at the science we have now about fetal pain and development of a child, we can see scientifically that there is an amazing, conclusive scientific case that a fetus is a unique human being that has the ability to feel and to think, and it has all those processes. So, when I started to look at issues one by one, and then I look at the Second Amendment, I'm very pro-gun. Why would I ever be a Democrat? So as I went through each one of these issues, I don't want to bore you to death and go through every one, but I realized, hey, I'm a Republican. And there was actually a moment where I sat down with my wife and I was like, honey, I think I'm a Republican. And she was like, yeah, I've known that. And it was like, my wife knew before I did, well before I did. So I always thought that was funny.
That's fantastic. So right now I'm with a group. We're in Philadelphia. We're traveling into Detroit and Milwaukee, doing a lot of interviews in the inner city areas. And what we're finding is that there's this assumption that if you fit this stereotype, or you're a part of this general group or this neighborhood, this block, this ward, you have to be Democrat. And if you're not, there's this onslaught of threats, of social pressure, all of these things that are taking place within these environments. How was that for you in the entertainment industry in Hollywood, kind of coming through this personal realization, and just how did that impact you? How did that impact your relationships?
I would say that it was the one thing that sort of did hold me back a little bit. Not so much the professional side, but really the friendship side for my kids. Because I wasn't worried about me professionally or any of that. I was worried about my kids losing friendships. And unfortunately, what I feared did come true after I came out as a Republican and went on Fox and everything. At that point, a bunch of families that we've been friends with for our kids' whole lives ghosted us and ghosted our kids. I'm talking about people where our kids went to each other's birthday parties every single year. And all of a sudden, after I came out as Republican, completely ghosted. So, I would say, though, that in terms of the feedback I've gotten, I got exactly what I expected and more in terms of the negative side of things. I was blacklisted by a number of major studios and record labels and things like that. I knew that would be the case, but I didn't do this to make money. I did this because at the end of the day, I knew I had two choices. I could hide, or on the second hand, actually I had three choices. I could hide and everything would stay okay. I could come out and be fake and pretend to hate Trump and pretend to hate Republicans, and I would actually make more money. Or I could be true to myself and have the integrity and be able to look my kids in the eyes at the end of the day and have them be able to look back at me and know that their dad had integrity and fought for what he believed in. And that was the most important thing to me. Was that the decision point for you? On your Twitter feed, it says, being a dad, the most important thing, number one job. I don't have the exact quote, but yeah, high value for family. And so what was that decision point of, I have to say something. I can't be on the sideline and I can't be a pretender? I would say I would give my wife a lot of credit. But before I get there, jump to that part, I would say Latino values are conservative values. So essentially the values I was raised with about valuing family and valuing life and not taking anything for granted and working hard, these are all conservative values. They're not left-wing values. And so those values carried over into my family life. And I would say I was very lucky to marry somebody who shared those values. And so when I was considering coming out as Republican, I had a lot of conversations with my wife, and she was the one who kept pushing me and said, you can't hold back because you're worried about our kids. You have to be you, or you're never going to forgive yourself. And she reminded me of what I was told as a kid, which was that the Cuban people, one of the biggest regrets of Cuban Americans that lived through what happened with Castro, their biggest regret was that they didn't say anything. And so I didn't want to have that same regret, that I stood by and I didn't say anything. It didn't matter what size my platform was, as long as I had somebody listening, that I didn't say something to try to warn them, that I would end up regretting it. And so that push was all I needed.
Watching the documentary, I loved watching your wife come out because she's so fiery. And I remember specifically when she was talking about open borders means, open trafficking. Yeah. Just what have been the issues that have driven you and your wife? You talked about pro-life, you talked about family. Landon specifically, what has been kind of the linchpin issue for her?
So for my wife, the linchpin issue was human trafficking, because, you look at even just yesterday, my wife helped expose the fact that the press, they totally ignored Department of Homeland Security's press conference where they announced the first center to fight human trafficking at DHS. And during that press conference, they asked the press, do you have any questions? Wait. No press says anything. Total crickets. And so my wife put that out there. It's now been viewed 2.5 million times. Ivanka Trump, Don Jr., Laura Trump, everybody's retweeted it. Chad Wolf at DHS has retweeted it. And we've exposed that the press does not want to tell the real story behind what the Trump administration has done to fight human trafficking. And it's been one of their greatest achievements. They've been fighting trafficking in a manner that we have not seen in modern times. They've made it a priority issue, and they've made a priority to help survivors to get to a place where they can live whole lives again. They can be whole again. And that's something, that restoration is something that the government had never focused on before in terms of helping these women and children get back on their feet and be able to live somewhat normal lives again. So that issue, very important to my wife. And I think that if the reason the media ignores it is they know how important this issue would be to most women, and they don't want that breaking through the media firewall. If it broke through, that issue on its own would flip so many votes that we wouldn't have any question of who was winning this election.
With your wife's exposure or exposing of the media's biased agenda and your background in media, in entertainment, what do you think our role is, or your role is as a media person in rebranding conservatism?
I love that question. I mean, that's like the perfect question for me. I think that this is the single most important thing that we can do in the coming years, is that we need to develop an ecosystem that is totally separate from Hollywood, totally separate from your mainstream media outlets, because what we found is they hate us. Okay, if we're just being really, really awfully honest about it, they hate us. And if they could, they would cut us out like a cancer, because that's how they see us. That's one of the benefits of having had the job that I've had and being in Hollywood and being around these big celebrities. I know how they talk about Republicans. I know how they talk about normal, everyday people and the things that they care about. They talk about your normal, everyday American like we're idiots, like we're just too stupid to know what's good for us, and that, damn it, we'll just tell them what's good for them. And that seems to be the way that they approach every issue. So the importance of creating a different track, a different ecosystem where we can have entertainment that reflects our values, that we can have media that reflects our values, cannot be overstated one bit. We need this. It's crucial to our survival as a party and to our values survival, because if our kids grow up only seeing and having reflected back to them left-wing values, then subconsciously they've had it fed to them their whole lives. And I can give you an example. In the most recent Scooby-Doo movie and the most recent Dora the Explorer movie, kids movies, right? These should be nonpartisan, neutral movies. But no, in these movies, they have multiple references in both movies to Ruth Bader Ginsburg, okay, multiple times in each movie. They have references to toxic masculinity and to the importance of equality. And they use these buzzwords that are going to be reflected back to children later on in life by Democratic politicians. When that happens, subconsciously what they've done is they've built a bridge for our children to walk over and to join the Democrats. We have nothing like that on the right that reflects our values, nothing at all. We have nothing that displays healthy masculinity to children, nothing that displays conservative icons to children in a heroic or positive manner. Everything they're reflected as a child and as a teenager, it's negative towards people who are conservative and lifts up people who are left-wing. So the long-term effect of that is going to be us being erased, essentially, our values being erased. And so that's one of the things that I would just put as much pressure as I can on people on the right to support conservative artists, can support conservative entertainment. And if you have the ability to do so, invest in these projects, be a part of it, be a part on the ground floor of making something new, because there's this untapped market of about half the country who doesn't have any entertainment made for them.
That's amazing. I feel like, though, a lot of people challenge and they're like, oh, it's just entertainment, or it's just, a movie and it's subliminal, it's subtle. How does this erosion of free speech take away more or less our humanity before the law, or our dignity in the context of American identity?
I would say, you used a word there that I use all the time. It's the subtlety of what they do is how they get away with it. And this isn't just media. This is social media. This is big tech. This is everything on the left has taken over academia. They've taken over big tech. They've taken over entertainment. They own every cultural institution. And we have to come to terms with the fact that they won in that regard. We criticize the left for not coming to terms with the fact that we won power in the White House. We won power in the Senate. We have the ability to make Amy Coney Barrett a Supreme Court justice. But we need to also similarly come to terms with the fact that they won that cultural fight. And the next battle in that fight, the war is not over, but they won the battle. And so we need to move on to the next battle, which is building our own parallel institutions and then beating them. We need to beat them at their own game. We need to have our own institutions empowered by our own people who share our values and to fight back in the same way that they have. Dinesh D'Souza, I was just talking to you yesterday, and he said something that I think is really important for people to get through is that, noble people like Abraham Lincoln, they didn't want, it wasn't in their nature to take an eye for an eye. It just wasn't. It's not in the nature of good people. But Abraham Lincoln knew that he toured the country and he went around all these areas and he met all these people, and he was basically taking stock of what America was. And he realized that even though he was a good person, the only way he was going to save America was to fight the same way that his opponents were fighting. He needed to do what they were doing. And so a good example of that was during the war when they, the Confederates had said that they were going to kill any slave that any slave person, or basically essentially black Union member that they found. Abraham Lincoln responded in kind by drafting a presidential executive order that said, it was actually a war order, but he said that essentially for any Union member that's killed, didn't matter what the race was, we're going to kill Confederate soldiers that are in our prisons. And so that's how he stopped them in their tracks. And so that's a very dramatic version of what I'm talking about. But essentially the idea is the same, is that we need to fight back the same way that they fight. They're using every lever of power in this election to win. We're not. And we need to take stock of that, and we need to honestly hold leaders accountable for that, because there are levers of power that we have not used that we should be using right now. And I think in the future, what you're going to see of the Republican Party is you're going to see a lot more fighters, people who have the mentality I have, who will run for office, and they will take that fight to the Democrats, and they will not be afraid to use every lever of power to make sure that our values are represented and to make sure that our party and our values are not erased.
That's phenomenal. I want to ask you if you're running for office, but I won't do that. But with that, there's this middle ground here, and you kind of alluded to yourself being a part of it at one point, where they're conservative, but they don't know it. I had a conversation on coming off a plane the other day. A woman had flown out to LA for the riots, BLM all over her, and she was an entrepreneur. And we just had a conversation about entrepreneurship. No context, no grid for Marxism, how that was playing into these issues, these debates. Last question here, and we'll wrap up. But how do we reach that middle ground? I feel like you have a heart for that, a heart for re-articulating that. What is your approach to that, and how can we partner with you in it?
Again, I love this question. So you're so right. There's this huge group of people for us to reach out to. Okay. What I said about fighting back on the left, fighting with the same firepower they use, it applies to this argument because there's this group of people they reach out to, we don't. And same thing we talked about subtlety and entertainment. That's one of the ways the left reaches out. That's why having our own parallel track to reach out is so important, because we can reach people on an emotional level. And I think that one of my criticisms of the right in the past, and part of why I didn't identify immediately as a teenager, was because I didn't have the emotional connection with the right. And the Republican Party has to become very smart and understand psychologically that teenagers are inherently emotional beings. So we need to be able to reach them on an emotional level. Now, so I'll give you a good example. Recently, where we live in Tennessee, Franklin, Tennessee, there was a BLM march. This is a very conservative area. And we actually ended up there by accident. We were taking our kids to a restaurant called Mellow Mushroom. And on our way into Mellow Mushroom, we realized we got boxed in by a truck. And we were like, who would park like that and box in the entire parking lot? And get out of the car, realize there's this big BLM march. And so we're stuck there. And I said, you know what? God puts you in places sometimes so that you can figure something out or do something that is going to make a difference. So I said, I'm going to take my phone and I'm going to go talk to the people at BLM. So first, before I went to talk to them, I listened to everything they had to say. I listened to what they were saying. I didn't heckle them. I didn't yell at them. I listened. And I think that approach was surprising to them. I don't think they realized that I disagreed with them at first. And so what I did is I crossed the street. I went over to them, which a lot of people were very confused about because they're not used to a Republican just walking over and talking to them. And I started every conversation with, hey, full disclosure, I'm a Republican and I don't agree with you on every issue that you guys have talked about today, but I want to find some understanding between each other. And I also want to correct some points that I think maybe you guys don't understand. And so I asked some questions. I said, do you think Republicans don't care about Black lives? And you had some who said, I believe they don't. And you had some who said, I do, but I think they don't understand. And there were all these different answers. But essentially, I helped break down for them. I said, why do you think somebody like me wouldn't care about Black lives? And tried to break down for them, sort of the nonsensical nature of that idea that we're human beings. And even if you hear somebody say all lives matter, that includes Black lives. And so, going through that whole thing and then also saying, are you guys aware of the statistics? So I'd ask them questions. I'd say, how many unarmed Black males were shot last year by police? And not one person knew the answer, not one. I did though. And I asked them how many white males were killed by police unarmed. None of them knew the answer, but I did. They were shocked by the answer. Some of the answers I got were 10,000 Black people were shot last year unarmed by police. Crazy answers like that. The reality was that there was 14 unarmed Black males killed last year by police, and there were 23 unarmed white males killed by police last year. Okay, so you can look at that and you say, oh, well, there were more white males than Black males. And then you go to per capita, and yes, per capita, there were more Black males than white males. But you have to also look at per capita how much violent crime is committed. So per capita, per arrest, there were actually more white males shot per arrest than there were Black males, because there were more Black males per capita arrested for a crime. So breaking this down for them, they started to understand. I said, logically, I'm not seeing the issue you're seeing, but I do see an issue where we can have more accountability, and I see an issue where we can make policing safer for police and for every American. And I don't want to break that down into one racial group. I want to break it down to everybody, because pragmatic policy that's good policy affects every American equally and helps every American who ends up at the other side of it, whether it's positive or negative. So going through that and having these talks with people, I actually was kind of heartened by the fact that a lot of them didn't know these things and that they weren't just completely radical. There were radicals there, but not every single one was. And I know I broke through to some. In fact, one lady ended up leaving the march. And we have this on camera. She left the march because she didn't know that BLM was a Marxist organization. And I took a video with me of the BLM founder, Patrisse Cullors. I think it's her name, Patrisse. I might be getting her last name wrong pronunciation-wise, but played the video of her saying, I'm a trained Marxist, and Marxism is the goal. And this woman, she had no clue. And so she was one of the ones that said that if I had known that, and I gave her the background on what happened in Cuba, she said, if I had known that, I wouldn't have supported this group. And I said, I understand, because you all have good hearts. For the most part, everybody here has good hearts. You have good intentions, but good intentions have led countries into very, very, very dark places. And you have to match good intentions with good facts and rational behavior. And so we had this conversation, and it ended in a really beautiful place because she really learned something. And she said to me, "You're the first Republican that I would vote for." And I said, "That's because you haven't talked to other Republicans." And that's the real answer, is that if every Republican leader took the time to go talk to these people the way that I talk to them, I would not be the only Republican that they said that they would vote for. They would be voting for every Republican, because my ideology is matched by Republican leadership for the most part. They just don't communicate the way I communicate. And so that's that communication to people and not assuming that they're all against you is important to our ability to grow this party and to survive, and not only survive, but thrive.
Thank you so much, Robbie. It is such a joy having you today, both your understanding of the issues, but your ability to articulate and to relate to people through them. I'd love for you to just invite people to follow you on Twitter, follow you on Facebook. I'll repeat it, but the I Am Republican documentary is on YouTube, yes, and then your Twitter and Facebook is at Robbie, R-O-B-B-Y, Starbuck, no S.
Starbuck, yeah, no S. You just want coffee.
Twitter and Instagram. That's right, I do. I'm
go to
crashing.
youtube.com/Robbie Starbuck or growuplive.com, and you can see the documentary for free. We don't charge anything. Like I said, for me and my wife, this is not a money-making thing. This is about changing the culture and changing the world in a positive way. And so we've given a little piece of ourselves back to people and done this just totally to make change. And so the best thing you could do to repay us is to share it and to make sure that undecided voters see it and that they understand what being Republican really is.
Such a joy. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Robbie, that was fantastic. Thank you so much for joining us. Everyone, we are so glad to have you on with us today. You can follow the I Am Republican documentary on YouTube. You can also follow Robbie on Instagram and Twitter at ROBBY Starbuck without the S on Instagram and Twitter. For Got Freedom, follow us on Facebook at Got Freedom 51. And you can get all of our latest news on the website got-freedom.org. It's been such a joy having you. Thank you so much. Look forward to connecting with you all on social media, and we'll see you soon.